Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Daire Farnon, and you're in the UK, I suspect, right?
I am. I'm in London.
In London. Oh, beautiful. That's great. And I'm glad you're here. Our initial little conversation pointed to some real common things and real interest. But why don't you tell us what you do, and then we can get into all these other things that probably we have some commonalities on. But what is it that you do there in London?
So I have a consulting company called Alchemy People, and I've got three levers of alchemy, so to speak. The first one is working with leadership and management teams. And my focus is very much on organizations in transition, however large or small. So my background's in people and culture. So a long career at senior level in people and culture in a variety of organizations. So I work with boards and leadership teams now and then, and also with their people functions, because it's great when the leadership team all get it. But the biggest power of change is making sure that all the people infrastructure supports the change, supports the culture change, supports the focus. And then I'm also good at focusing, or I work on focusing employee life cycles.
Which is a transition question too.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. And so tell us a little bit of your history, because I think that's a jumping into the question of transition point. So tell us what you told me earlier.
So our little preamble before we went live was about people moving house, and I've had a lot of transition in my life, and I've actually moved home 43 times. And I think my interest in transition has also been career-wise. My most exciting organizations that I've worked for, where I've been able to make the biggest impact or add the biggest value, has been when I've worked as part of a management team or a leadership team in organizations in transition, whether they've been going through change cycles to grow, outsourcing, acquisitions, changing how things are done, and the whole concept of how do you elegantly exit people or help people when the organization changes, or they change, or they've got aspirations that the organization can't meet, about having those. So my background is psychology. How do you make sure that they're adult to adult conversations? So working with both stakeholders or both parties, sort of do it elegantly. Even though the world's a big place, all our worlds are actually quite small, and it's likely that paths will cross again. And
No question about it. I had lunch yesterday with a friend that I've had 20 minutes with since the mid-70s, and we just picked up where we left off. And he has not gone through lots of transition, but I have, and yet we're the same people. And I think that's part of the magic of figuring out what transition is to be the same person wherever you are.
Yeah. And there's been that whole shift, hasn't there, in management, thinking that actually the whole thing about leadership and good management is about authenticity and being yourself, not trying to be someone that you're not, or living values that are not aligned with who you are. It takes up a lot more energy, leads to a lot more conflict. Whereas if people are in the right organizations and the focus is right and the values are right, it's much easier to deliver.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, because this has been with me for a long time, this question. For people who say spend a long time in one place.
Mm-hmm. In one organization, or living in
one organization, they're in there for 20, 25 years. Do they change? Do they change because the organization kind of envelops them in and acclimatize them or assimilates them into the culture of the company, so that if they were to have to leave, that transition for them could be quite traumatic. What do you think about that?
I think it's a similar argument to the nature nurture thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why are we how we are? And I do think it's nature nurture. I think some people are a lot more flexible, agile in how they deal with things. And other people, I think, are just see the world, feel more comfortable in the world being a certain way. Some of it, I think organizations can support people through change, or work with people through the cycle of grief, which is the same as the change cycle. But I do think sometimes organizations will change, and it's not the way it changes isn't right for that individual and how they like to work, the environment that they function best in. And you and I have a mutual contact, Robin Davis, and Robin and I are both GCologists, and he probably spoke with you about it.
Yeah.
And it's the lens that, the different proclivities that we have. So if someone likes to come into work, really focus on getting things done, then that's the sort of environment that they will flourish in. Whereas other organizations are all about new ideas, new concepts, and it'll be a different type of person that will flourish best in those sorts of organizations. So it's quite a difficult question to answer, because it depends on the organization and the individuals.
I guess that's why they
But
need.
Pardon?
I guess that's why they need you to come help them make those transitions.
Yeah, and I do think employers have an obligation to either help people through the transition, or be really honest and sort of say, think about it. Is this the world that you want to be in? And if it's not, let's work towards parting, but let's do it in a way that works for you and for us, because we don't want to lose your knowledge. But if you're kicking and you're causing issues all the way, is this a bump we're going to get over?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're going this way anyway, and however badly you behave or whatever's going on, because that will disrupt everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I have run into conflicts with people that I work for, not as a consultant, but when I was an employee. And and it was that kind of situation where it wasn't that I didn't fit in, it was that their management style didn't align well with me.
Yeah.
And I viewed them as, in one case, abusive, in another case, expressing their own insecurity, but using me as kind of a foil for that. And it was a really interesting, and it told me I really don't need to work for someone. I have to run my own business.
But I think anybody's relationship with their boss is the most important relationship in a working environment.
Yeah.
So I've seen scenarios where it's just not a match.
Right.
The boss may be a micromanager because that's what they need to be able to deliver, and they hire somebody who is a game-changing free spirit, who isn't very good at working within office hours, but will work all through the night and deliver amazing work. But the manager needs to control.
Yeah.
And that's never going to work, because something somewhere needs to give, and actually the person who delivers but needs more flexibility either needs to be self-employed or has a manager who really understands them and who the individual respects.
Right.
So that the manager can say, you're pushing your luck at the moment. I can deal with all this because you deliver for me. But actually the noise around the business or the organization isn't great. You need to do a bit of self-PR.
So the relationships that we have in the workplace really are critical to whether we're going to be successful on the one hand, but they may send the wrong message about whether we should transition out of there.
Yeah. Yes. And I do think sometimes people want to throw the towel in or give up too soon without allowing themselves to go through all the emotions they need to go through to come out the other end, and to see that actually there is an opportunity, more opportunity in this new world than there was in the other world. But managers need to be quite mature in themselves to think, I just got to ride this storm. This person's really going to come through it.
My experience is the people who are the managers, particularly the middle managers, or they're the regional manager for a, say, a company where they have a bunch of retail outlets, something like that. I find that they are constantly squeezed.
Yeah.
Squeezed, and that's the word I've used with them. Where between the headquarters office and the local, manager of the local store, and they may have 20 or 30 stores that they're overseeing, and every store has its own particular issues, and it's difficult for headquarters, particularly if it's a large company, has thousands of outlets, to say, well, we have some latitude here. We can let the stores be the stores that they need for that community, and and oftentimes that doesn't work.
But that's a really interesting concept, and it's something that I work with a lot with organizations, and it's about having negotiables and non-negotiables. So whoever you are, there will be some stuff, whether it's about your values, whether it's about your client experience or your customer experience, and where at whatever touch point anybody's at, that's a non-negotiable. Or it might be as simple as our pay review takes place on the 1st of April every year for everyone. But then there's a whole load of stuff that is negotiable. So for those retail outlets, I'm sure there'll be specific needs, whether, I don't know, it's really difficult to get quality staff for whatever reason, because the schools aren't very good, or there's a high crime rate, or loads of reasons that you can't put a blanket policy. So you have to give latitude and empower those regional managers, or the retail, the store managers. And I'm working with a client at the moment, and it's just so refreshing. They've promoted and appointed a new MD for a particular part of the business. And this guy, he is speaking with me, and really, he said, I just want to empower people. If I can empower people, every touch point with our clients, with our customers, and every single person is empowered, my focus is to enhance that experience. So we're doing some work around that, about how can we get that whole thing throughout the organization. The owners, it's quite a large organization, are really keen to do this because they don't want to lose the entrepreneurial spirit.
I was going to ask you if he felt empowered. Sounds
the
like
MD.
Yeah. And so, what are you recommending to him for how to do that? How does this guy do that?
How is he going to roll it out? Well, we're going through quite a big change program at the moment, and there's lots of things happening, and it's every single touch point. So we're enhancing the internal comms, which have been a little bit lax before, but we're getting the owner, the MD, and he's the MD of one of the business divisions, and so that people just have a very different experience. The first time we did something, we said, right, anybody got any questions? We had the 80 top leaders of the business together. Silence.
Yeah.
We did just an update, a briefing. We're on this change cycle last week. We had about 20 questions. So bit by bit, it's sort of, we want to change things, and it was different to what had been before. So people are seeing that things are different. People are having a different, it's not just words, or it's not just another slide deck. What people are experiencing is different.
And how much is this dependent upon the senior executives, the owners, to?
Oh, completely, completely. If they didn't back it, and if they weren't prepared to be visible, and the owner is very introvert, very quiet. He's a man of few words. So we're pushing him out of his comfort zone,
Yeah.
but not trying to change him. So the first couple of briefing sessions, he sort of had a script and he read his script. And I said, oh, we can't do that again. And I said, why don't we do in conversation with? And I really enjoy working with him because he's super smart. He gets it. He gets the whole thing about empowerment, creating a great place to work where people stay for a long time. So he gets all that. So we did an in conversation and he was able to be himself. He's never going to be, a motivational speaker jumping around and clapping his hands. But he was very authentic. He was very authentic.
Mhm.
And the feedback that we've had was really good, that it was sort of, it's really nice. And there's something lovely that he's not this hugely polished motivational speaker, but it comes back to the authenticity again.
So in your communication with that level of an organization, what do you say to them when you're at the beginning of something to convince them or to communicate to them that their future is dependent upon not simply their decision, but what they enable others to be able to do? How do you have that conversation?
Um, I don't, it doesn't happen. I need to have a meeting with you about it. It happens as the relationship builds and understanding what's important to those leaders. What are the hooks for them going to be? And in most of my best projects, it's also been about having other people within that organization at that senior level who really want the change to happen.
Maybe the question I really should ask, and you don't have to answer this, but is
Okay.
what do you think they think they're hiring you to do?
Oh, now that's a good question. So usually they're hiring me because there's an issue, or their CPO's left, their HR director's left, or they're not quite sure what they want from a people function.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually my way in. And then the discussions are around, well, what would a good people function look like for you? What would you be experiencing? What would you be getting that you're not getting now? What's it going to look like? What sort of language would people use? What sort of relationship would you have with that team? And then some of the stuff that comes out, and it's sort of, well, actually, have you got that clarity on what your your employee value proposition is? Is there the mission, the vision, the values? I speak with people and people have a vague idea, but if we're going out to market and we've got, I don't know, 70 vacancies at any one time, what's going to make us different from everybody else who's fishing in the same pool for people?
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice, honest, open organization, but do you think everybody's feeling that? Do you think you're coming back to the middle managers? What do you do to make them feel special? Because they're the people who are going to be living what you want people to live. So it's those sorts of conversations. And quite often it's planting that seed and then coming back to it with people.
Mm-hmm.
It is the relationship building thing. And just coming back to what we were talking about before, I think if ever you, and I've got a great interest in people, And some of the exercises or some of the work that we do with leaders or leadership teams is about being quite vulnerable or open with the rest of your team. And I can't take credit for this. So a non-exec in an organization that I was working with, we organized a dinner and everyone had to bring something along that actually spoke volumes about them. And it had to be quite personal. So I think there were 12 of us at this dinner. And people brought different things. So one guy bought a pair of boxing gloves. And, he in his youth, he would have been a professional sportsman. But he played football, English football, to a very high level. He was signed by a club, which is a big thing in the UK. And then he had a knee injury, which meant that the club dropped him. It was a big, that's quite a big deal. Yeah. So he took up boxing, and then just how the determination, you get knocked down, you get up again. And you can see how that experience had a huge impact on his life. Mm-hmm. And there were people were very open, but that cohesiveness that actually you're working with a leadership team who can be and it is quite a vulnerable thing, but they can have those conversations, and working with colleagues when you know them better than just, why is this salesperson selling all this stuff that we can't, we just don't have a pipeline enough to honor it. Yeah. So, but the relationship bit of it, but so for me, moving house so much, I think you do develop those skills where you have to fit in pretty quickly and build relationships quite quickly. But you have to have integrity and be true to your word and do what you say you're going to do. And have that confidentiality. If people share things with you, that you respect that.
When I first started as a consultant in the mid-90s, never been a consultant, never ran a business, but I started anyway. And pretty quickly over the first 3 or 4 years, I realized that, and part of my backstory is that I began my career as a Presbyterian minister.
Right.
But I found that I was ill-suited to parish ministry because I was a change agent. They don't want change. They want to keep things safe. So I wandered into these other fields, other things I was doing. But what I found was they were looking for someone to be the intimate outsider, someone with an outsider's view, who can look in from the outside, but who can then identify with us at the deepest personal level. And that's really difficult when you have a contentious team who are vying for leverage and influence and the perks of being on that team.
Can I pinch your line there? I love that, the intimate outside. Yeah. I mean, it just encapsulates it.
Yeah.
It's
and the thing that I think the most important thing embedded in that little idea is that you and I, as this outsider that's coming in, must care for those people and their organization at a level that maybe many of the people in the organization do not.
Yeah.
And because unless we really care for them, we're not going to be authentic with them.
I think that's very, very true. And the more senior people get, the less, I'm sure they are care, but the less demonstrable actions of care. If you report into a CEO, the CEO's so busy, they don't always have time to have those check-ins, or
they're very isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of us are well suited to pass through the social network, the social environment of those CEOs. You know,
Yeah.
we have the education credentials and maybe the background, and we went to the right schools, all those sort of
Yeah.
things. So we can do that. Um, and then there's some of us who are probably better working with the middle managers
Yes.
and
Yeah.
identifying. I mean, they need the intermittent outsider as well.
Yes.
And when I go into a store, I look for the manager. I talk to the managers, and I'm just to support them to say, I like your store. I like, thank you for, your kindness and the way you greeted me, things like that.
Yeah.
Because they don't get a lot of that. They're isolated too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And but I also think that kindness is the most underrated
Yeah.
value that it doesn't cost anything to be kind to people. It's I've worked across a number of various sectors, and I worked for a gaming company once, and I was very lucky that one of my senior colleagues, we were at a meeting, and I said, we were talking about what should the values of this business be, and I said kindness, and he agreed, and nobody else in that room, they sort of poo-pooed it, but he's quite a unique leader, and it doesn't cost anything. That this client that I've been talking about, they are kind. If something happens to somebody in that huge organization, they're kind. It's not brutal, but kindness, I think, is real, and that's, people remember how you made them feel, as opposed to if you gave them, oh, here's another bonus or whatever. It's
Yeah.
how people feel at
As they
work.
go, but people don't remember what you did. They remember how they felt, deal with you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
That's
Very
that's a
definitely.
legacy thing. That's not just today. That's something that they remember after
Yeah.
you passed on.
And
So
hopefully they'll pick up some of they'll want to copy that or imitate that in
yeah, oh
whatever
yeah.
they do. Yeah.
My father was an HR guy in a
Oh,
national,
really?
and yeah, and I've said this before, so and I've said it in print too. He would come home at night. We'd have dinner. We had dinner as a family every night, and he would complain about how his boss dealt with him. And I understand that, but as a teenager, early teens, it pointed me away from going into business.
Yeah. Yes,
I
it
don't
would.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And but I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up in ministry because it's really broad. You can do almost anything in ministry, and it's a people business, and it was a perfect place to start. Not actually, well, it was a good place to end, but it also has its limitations. Let me just say it that way.
Yeah.
Um, but my father passed away in 2010, and after he had retired in the mid 80s, he continued on with some clients, some businesses, but he also spearheaded the food bank in his community, which is right here where I live now, and
Yeah.
and the people remember him for that. They still talk about that, and so to me, and he was a kind man, um, and what it tells me is that you can have effects upon people. You can have an impact upon people at any age in anything that you do if you're willing to be a certain type of person. And I think this is what you're describing. And and what we need is for the training ground for leadership in business to incorporate this in some manner. And I'm not sure that I'm an outsider in that whole world, that whole management world. And so I don't know actually how they do that. But it seems to me that people have to learn to be relational. They have to learn to be kind. They have to learn to listen. Have to learn all those things as a part of the work that they do, and they're not really trained to do that.
Mm, it's
Maybe.
interesting. I think certainly a lot of leadership programs that I've designed and run, they're about getting feedback. They're about really helping the leaders to really understand who they are and their impact on other people. And the whole thing, there's pros and cons to 360 feedback. And I do think it depends on how it's managed and how it's run and whether or not it has impact. And being realistic about if you've got somebody who's a tax geek, and they're not leading a huge team of people, how critical is it for them to really embrace, and that's an awful thing to say, but if you're investing in leadership programs, you want that person to be the best in their tax advice. But anybody leading people, I think a lot of leadership programs now are really quite deep, and there's a lot more focus on the individual reflecting on who they are, how their behavior impacts others, understanding other people to get the best out of them or build relationships with them. And that's certainly changed over the 30 years that when I was in-house. That's been a huge shift.
Yeah, I agree.
Which I think is a good thing. I think it's a very good thing.
It's good and it's necessary. I mean,
yeah,
because I keep running into stories of what it once was like for a lot of people.
yeah.
And now here's where I think the next stage of this question about leadership and how we learn how to do that within a institutional structure is, so how do we equip say the Gen Z generation to be leaders in business?
Well, you've hit on one of my pet topics. So the whole thing about multi-generational workforces and the tensions and the expectations. So it's very difficult. I think it's difficult for every generation. So the older generations who are trying to manage the millennials, the Gen Zs, come from different worlds and different expectations of what's okay and what isn't okay. And that creates another challenge, I think, because I'm of a generation where you worked like crazy and you worked hard, you played hard, you got recognized for it, and your career developed. And so sometimes, yeah, it is a little bit difficult when it's sort of, oh, well, I finish at 5, so I can't help. And it's how to manage everybody's expectations about where should the focus be. So I think everybody just needs to click that dial a bit to understand their colleagues or the type of culture an organization is or what's important. And the whole thing about boundaries, people who've got caring responsibilities, people who've got childcare, men and women, childcare responsibilities. How can the world of work be created in a way that the valuable contribution that everyone can make can happen without it being confined to this sort of 9 to 5 with an hour for lunch and a break in the morning and a break in the afternoon? The world's moved on from that.
That's right.
And there's lots of discussions in the UK, I'm sure in the US as well, about with COVID, everybody moved to home working. Lots of employers are now saying we want our people back. I think the most sensible solution is, hybrid working where people can focus if their jobs enable them to work from home, because not everybody can work from home by nature of the work that they do. But it does require a different type of management.
It certainly does. And I've had many conversations with people, none of them on the podcast, but just, sitting around a bar, or, someplace having a conversation. And they're talking about what they went through during the pandemic and how they almost as soon as it started, they quit because they knew that there's going to be all this forced stuff. they had enjoyed the freedom of working the way they were working, and they realized that they were not going to be free any longer. So they quit, and they're now doing something else. But what I see is, and so I'm a baby boomer, so I'm very conscious of
Me too.
everyone who's younger than me being different. And I see that we're still living in the world that our generation created. And
that's one of the challenges, I think, that all the talent that's coming through, and like you, I'm because I'm fascinated, and I think also we boomers are quite often blocking people's ambition. There was one guy who'd become quite senior in a creative organization, and he said, but I've left. I said, why did you leave? That's like a dream job for someone at your stage of life. And he said, my bosses, the owners, they kept blocking me, any ideas. There was nowhere for me to go, nothing for me to do.
That's exactly right.
And it's sort of, well, there's got to be a way to embrace things. And yeah, it won't be perfect for anybody, but that organization lost this incredible talent.
That's right. And that's happening in a lot of places. But the benefit is that talent is going somewhere where it will be more appreciated.
Yeah.
They'll have a better chance of fulfilling the potential that they have. I've had conversations within like a 24-hour period of time with people who I suspect are Gen Xers.
Yeah.
One woman was a restaurant owner. She had run a restaurant for 30 years. She closed it because the help that she was getting, who were all Gen Zers, high school and college level, didn't know how to do wait staff work.
Yeah.
And she expected them to come knowing how to do that.
But why would they?
That's right. And I said that to her. He says, you had expectations. He says, well, I have a lot of things on my plate I have to take care of, and I need to hire people who can come in and do the job. That was her myopic little poke. I said, well, you're not going to ever find that anymore, because the freedom that millennials and Gen Zers, who are different from one another, have is that they have the right to walk away. And I think that most of us who are, say, 45 and older have never been in an environment where there was freedom to walk away.
No.
Except that I've always felt the freedom to walk away. I told my kids, they were all millennials. I said, I was a millennial before anybody else was a millennial, because I never felt that I needed to just do what I was told to do. No.
I think mine was when I hit 30, and my job was made redundant because the company relocated, and I got another job really quickly. So for the first time in my life, I had what I called running away money. So I didn't spend it. I kept it in an account, and it was sort of, okay, if the world gets really bad, it's okay.
Yeah. And if you're frugal, I've got Scottish blood in me, if you're frugal, then it's even better, because that you're not going to spend a lot of money on stuff that's frivolous, that it's not going to serve you. You're going to buy a car and you're going to keep it 10 years.
Yeah.
Or 12 or 15. But that's part of what freedom really is. And my sense is that we're entering into a transition in the world, which will lead to greater freedom for people to express themselves and to create the work that they want to create.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know if you've come across London Business School, and two of the professors there have done some work around the 100-year life. Have you come across that?
I'm familiar with it, but I don't know anything about it. I would say I know nothing about it, but I'm familiar with it. I've heard of that. But
Well, I mean, it's been around certainly pre-COVID. They were doing lectures on it and writing books and seminars. And it's just interesting how we're all living so much longer. You know, if you were 50 or 60 in previous generations, you'd be doing your knitting or sitting with your slippers. Whereas now, with the increase in healthcare, aspirations, financial wealth, people are healthy and fit, and they
right.
might have done a career for 30 years, but their productivity rate is as good as any 21-year-old. So
Yeah.
the whole debate about, and certainly in the UK, people need to work longer because the pension provision, and I think it's probably the same in the US.
Tell me.
But do they want to keep doing the jobs that they've been doing for the last 20 years or 30 years? And they give an example, and it's sort of, if somebody my age did want to change career, if I applied on a graduate scheme to be a journalist, for example, employers probably wouldn't give me a chance. They probably wouldn't take me through, and because the salary would be so much lower. But I've paid my mortgage off, my living expenses aren't as much, so that's okay. I know what the salary is, and I'm happy to take it.
Yeah.
I'm not likely to be sick. My attendance will be good. My focus will be good. I'm not going to go out partying because I've done my partying. And it's sort of this need for societal change that is a lot more inclusive of different generations to give people opportunities. And just coming back to the example I gave about the creative guy, I don't know if the people he worked for had sort of peaked or if they were hanging on to it for some reason. And it comes back to personal relationships and getting people to think about themselves. But if they'd stepped back, he could have continued to develop, and they could have been doing stuff that perhaps they were really excited about. I find this whole thing interesting, and people talk about third life, and I certainly went through that sort of, I've had this big corporate career. What do I want to be doing? And I explore. I don't want to be a yoga teacher. I'll be a lousy yoga teacher. I don't want to be a nutritionist. I really like what I do. But what I didn't want was having to do another round of pay and bonuses. I loved doing the change stuff, but I didn't want to do all the other bits.
Well, I think you are going to find when you quote retire, you're going to find that you're not retiring, but you're restarting into something new, doing all the same things you were always doing. I mean, that's where I turned 70 last year, and I talk about entering my third half of life.
Yeah.
And I have a plan to live to 105. So I have 35 years, and the way my life has been kind of organized, I've had these large segments of 35 years, and chapter 1, chapter 2. Now have begun chapter 3, and it's not consulting, it's not coaching, it's podcasting, it's writing, and I can do that for a very long time because it doesn't require me to fly all the time, which is, I used to fly all the time, but I haven't flown in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm at a point now where I feel like I'm producing the best work of my career. So I think that,
and enjoying it, because that's for me, that's a key thing. It's about.
And I have big plans. I bought a big house. I bought a house that's I bought a 5-bedroom house, 100-year-old 5-bedroom house. So I'll have 2 guest rooms. I have a library. I'll have an office. Then I have my own bedroom, and then I have this space down here for events, for social events. Gather people together for unscripted conversation. Have a little refreshment, have something to eat, and we sit and we'll talk for an hour or two, or
Like the old-fashioned salons, you know, when the sort of
absolutely the Viennese.
so we have an evening at the salon and great
Well,
conversations and
we have a art school here, and one of the guys I know teaches music theory there, and I've talked with him about doing some music events here, you know.
wonderful.
So, but that's an expansion of this idea that we should be in conversation with one another.
Yeah.
And that we're not, and the structures of society are not really organized for that. And social media is really not organized for us to have conversations like what we're having today.
Yeah.
You know, and you and I could probably talk for 4 or 5 hours and not even realize that
Easily.
time is gone by.
Easily.
Because you're doing similar things to me, but we have come at it from totally different directions with totally different experiences, but we see something in the center of their center that is really true about transition and about conversation, about people, about relationships. And I think, you know, I had this notion at the turn of the century that the institutional structure of the modern society will decline, will continue to decline, and I'm an outlier in this, so it will continue to decline, and what will replace it will be community, and we'll see.
I hope so.
Well, I'm not hoping for that. I'm working for that because I see that what all the interaction I have with people is telling me I want more interaction with people and want to work where I have interaction with people. And and I think, I mean, my sense is that for all the privilege and responsibility and prominence of the people at the top of an organizational chart, the people have a lot to say about whether they're successful, and they have to communicate. And so I worked with a large multinational corporation that will go unmentioned, who had gone through some really difficult stuff. They're still going through some really, and in many respects, their senior leadership is responsible for this. But anyway, so I did some work with them and did some webinars with them. And I went to their home office, and a friend of mine who brought me in to do this work, you know, he took me around to see, you know, where he works. And he took me into the executive suite, and I came up to this woman who was an executive assistant, and she was immaculate. She was, you know, she was right out of central casting and very formal, almost offensively formal with me. And until I started asking her questions, I said, "How long have you worked here?" And she was 48. She had worked there since she was 20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And I said,
she was institutionalized
in
within that organization. That's the only world she knew.
I said, "You must love this company." She says, "I do." He says, "And so it must break your heart to see what's going on with it." And she says, "It does." And then I said, what I have identified in working with organizations is if there's a persistent residual culture of values that persists because of the relationships of the people. And you and all the people like you here who love this company are why it will survive bad leadership. And you will have expectations on each other so that you will do what is the right thing to preserve the integrity of the company.
Yeah.
And she basically melted into her seat, because I think what I took from that was that she finally had someone who recognized what her contribution to the company was and was thanking her for that. And also kind of identifying the pain that she was feeling while the company was going through this trying time. I think that segment of the population, who are the bottom third of every organization, is longing for leadership that will validate who they are and want them.
I completely agree with that.
And our job is to help the senior leadership see that and feel the freedom. I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use the word, to love their people.
Yeah.
To really love them, so that they feel that it's worth all the investment of their time and their careers in serving the institution.
Yeah. No, that's my view of the world as well, that if leaders truly care, the staff populate, they forgive errors. They'll know when it's, people cock up, that it happens. But if people know that they're cared for, they are forgiving. So if somebody says, look, I don't think we made the right decision there, we're going to sort it out, we're going to make it up to you, we're going to address it, it's okay.
It's okay. That's exactly right.
It's okay. Yeah.
People are very forgiving, but they won't forgive.
Unbelievably forgiving. Yes.
They will not forgive being lied to or being treated with indignity.
No. Or being treated like idiots, or being told one thing when people blatantly know that that's not the case.
So the question is, if this is so true and it's so evident, I mean, we're just two people who have kind of walked our way through life and doing good work with people, and we see things, but we're not Elon Musk. We're not these stars. We're just people who do good work. And if we see this, why can't other people see it?
I think sometimes in organizations, people get so tied up in the pressure of delivering stuff that they forget. I do believe that 99.9% of people in a working environment are good people.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
And people have anxieties and they don't feel safe. I spoke with a senior leader the other day, and he said, one of the biggest turning points in my life was that he had a session with an executive coach or something, and he realized that all the stuff that he worried about, that he'd send an email to his manager that was a bit edgy, didn't get a response, he'd worry about it all weekend.
Yeah.
He said, as soon as I gave myself that permission, that I hadn't done anything wrong, it was okay and fine, what will be will be, he said, that was the most liberating thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And I think so many people, and it's quite humbling, and I forget that work is such a big part of people's lives, a bit like your dad, your father coming home and telling you all over dinner what had happened at work. Most of the population, when they get home at night, will talk about their work colleagues, their line manager, what happened at work.
Yeah, it's really true.
So all those leaders have a huge responsibility, because they're not just part of the lives of the people who work for them, but they are for their families, their friends, the communities.
Well, they have an opportunity there as well.
Yeah.
And the opportunity is to build a company where they're unified towards a common purpose and a common love of the product that they're selling, and a common care for their customers. I mean, that's there's a lot that's been written about why we're in this state we're in, where there's such contention. But I don't think that any of that is sustainable. I think the only thing that's sustainable ultimately, at the end of the day, is how we treat one another. And
Yes.
and if we treat each other well, then we can sustain whatever effort or endeavor we're doing. But if
Yeah.
we don't treat each other well, we've already decided that the company has a limited half life, and it's going to be half than even than they imagine.
Yeah.
I worked with a group, and I was part of a team that came in and worked with a group. I was the facilitator of this team, and we worked with a hosiery mill here in North
Oh
Carolina.
yeah.
And this was in 2000, and the founder had opened the company in 1940, and they were still operating under the same rules of 1940,
Oh my golly.
and they were failing, but they didn't know. They didn't know. They weren't curious enough to figure out why are we losing money, and there just was, I guess there was enough money in the business to keep everyone satisfied. So we came in and reworked the operation of how they make socks,
Yeah.
and but they couldn't take the next step because they weren't communicating with each other well enough to say, okay, what's the next place that we need to re-engineer what we're doing. And that was in how they understood their relationship to their customers, because everybody else was going to just in time and managing inventory and all of that, but they never did. They were just making socks. And within 18 months of our project being over, they were out of business. And that was really instructive to me about how leaders need to constantly be not um, tied to their perception of the world as it is,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that they need to really say, what is it that I don't know, and how does that matter?
And
And
what's happening in the world and what's the current thinking, and have a few wild cards on the team who are curious, and
yeah,
it, nothing in life stays the same. A
yeah,
bit like us talking about different generations. It's constantly changing, and our conversation today may be amazing, but something happens tomorrow. You have another conversation with someone, I read a book or go to a lecture. We've moved on. We've got new ways of thinking about things, exciting ways of thinking about things. Um, and some of them may go nowhere, but that also that continuous improvement. And sometimes it may be the newest person on the team who sort of thinks, well, why are you doing it that way?
yeah, because they have an outsider's perspective.
Yeah. Or there's a little bit of software, like I can't say it, calendarly.
Bad word.
It's,
Yeah,
but if you think the hours that saves everybody, trying to find times to meet and things like that. I mean, so simple.
it is. It's it has made doing a podcast easy.
So you can focus on what you excel at rather than sort of, oh, they can't do 3 weeks on Tuesday. Oh. So you waste an hour and then they cancel.
Well, I'm so glad to meet you. This is
I really enjoyed it.
it has been delightful. It's nice to know someone who thinks like I do, um, and the work that you're doing is really important. And I hope that you continue to find places where you feel a sense of fulfillment from the work that you're doing, because I know it's important, and I hope that you find a long life of service that allows you to feel like you're having an impact that really matters.
Thank you.
And you all who are watching and listening, thank you for doing that. And I want you to understand that what we're talking about is just not between us; it's really between all of us. And that if you were to imagine yourself in the workplace, creating places for conversation and for interaction, and if you did, maybe you do that with your boss, say, help me to understand better how I can have a greater impact here, I think then you begin to understand what we're talking about, that our relationships with one another and expression of kindness and openness really matters. And I thank you for watching, because a lot of the themes that come through this podcast are really about this very thing. And I hope that it is making a difference to you in your life and your work. So thanks for watching. And thank you again. And I look forward to having another conversation with you soon.
Definitely.
So we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.